G'day guys, Mac with the Outer Circle, and in today's episode, we're going to quickly talk about the new Siegebreaker console. Basically, I'm going to break this video into two parts. First, Character Macca talking about the console. Second part, normal person me trying to fix the abomination. So, let's kick this off. This is an awful model, and I mean, it is woeful. If you like it, cool. I'm not personally affected by you liking it. I don't understand how people would like it, but cool if you do, right? Because my opinion, your opinion, they're equal, okay? Because it's personal taste. Now, the reason I'm going to talk about why I don't like it first is because I can either say it's shit and then move on. This leaves me in a quandary though, because if I do that, people will go, well, you haven't explained why it is, your opinion isn't valid. Fair enough. Or I can explain why it is shit, and then I have people saying, why are you dwelling on why it's shit? So either way, I can't win. Let's just dwell on why it's shit. So this model is a clusterfuck that doesn't represent what the console should be representing on the tabletop. Now, the easy thing to say is this should be in Mark III instead of Mark VI because it's a Siegebreaker console. It's supposed to be the sort of guy that hangs around with breaches and quad mortars and phosphex weapons, right? And instead what we're getting is a guy who looks like a kit bash of the new Tank Commander sprue on some terrible, terrible legs with a tacited belt that makes no sense, holding a Stormcast Eternal's hammer. And it does nothing for me. I know some people love the little screen with the epic STL Marine that's been just slapped into it. This makes no sense. If you're going to have him showing up somewhere on the screen, a bastion or a fortification or a city, an Aegis defense line with a land raider behind it, something like that is what should be showing on the display. Why is he looking up a marine? And why has he got a picture of like the stars and space above painted onto his... Doesn't matter what's painted on there, it's just paint, right? Anyone can change it. The only redeemable part of this miniature, and I don't think it's the gigantic iPad, is the backpack. I think that's a really cool backpack with the two rad grenades, which are strangely glowing, and right next to his nutsack too, for the one at the hip. So, see a doctor about that, mate, because you've probably got three-tailed swimmers right about now. Not great. Yeah, but the backpack is pretty decent. I would like to use that backpack, actually, as a bits part on quite a few models, especially if I was doing a Destroyer-themed force, like I redid Nemesis chapter for this edition. That would be a really cool backpack to put onto the miniatures. So, he's got that going for him, but the hammer looks awful. It looks awful. Because it doesn't look like a 30k hammer. It's not that the hammer as a design in and of itself is bad, it's that it doesn't suit this game, this time period. It looks nothing like the other hammers, and whilst I'm not against change, I don't think this was good change. 30k in its realism arc versus just slapping this anvil-shaped Age of Sigmar hammer in doesn't work for me. I don't care for the nose pipe, and how's this armor supposed to be reinforced when, okay, you can say it looks like an extra armored plate on his shoulder, but it's got this ribbed cabling, and of course the ribbed cabling has always been, it's a weak spot in this armor. The cabling is meant to be a big weakness, and it's one of the compromises of Mark V armor is having all this exposed ribbing. And here, it's like his whole thighs are just covered in it, and there is no extra armor on those thighs that you can see in the images. They're just his thighs, and they've just made these cutouts for the sake of something visually different. Same as on the chest, like this should be the most armored part of a Marine's torso, and instead it's got the least amount of armor because there's these big ribbed sections replacing solid armored plate. So for these reasons and more, none of this model works for me. And the whole holographic display iPad thing, some people love that. Some people are amused by the bright shiny objects and love that sort of thing. I'm not one of them. If it does amuse you and you think it's great, thumbs up for you, but it's not enough for me to like a model just because it's on there. In fact, like I said, I think if you're going to do that, that's fine. Pick something more appropriate to the console you're trying to represent. This is supposed to be the Siegebreaker console. This is an engineer unit who is leading troops in a campaign and explaining to them where he wants the artillery to fire. and how best to utilize the artillery and the explosives and the esoteric weapons of the Legion to bring about undermining an enemy fortification. He shouldn't be showing a Marine on his iPad. The Marine being communicated to on the iPad is something like a Master of Signals might do. So, this brings up another point. This looks like a Master of Signals. Now, fixing it. Fixing this abomination is going to be my suggestions today. And the easiest fix is obviously, let's go to Mark III, right? I want to do something a little bit more than that and suggest a list of parts that would represent, even on Mark VI, doing this a bit better. So, first of all, we've got all of our different console types that are floating around for different legions and such. Straight away, you look at something more like the Death Guard Legion Praetor and the way he is sort of posed. If you had that sort of posing on the miniature and holding a combi weapon, and in fact, I think the Legion Champion holding the combi melter under the arm, that is much more emblematic of the Siegebreaker than having a guy armed with a Thunderhammer. Because Thunderhammers are a good weapon and all, but a Siegebreaker's job in games of 30k is not to be a close combat monster. It is to sit there and to buff units he's with, namely things like missiles and autocannons, giving them sunder by his mere joining of the squads, as well as allowing you to take Phosphex weapons in the army. He is much reduced from the previous edition of the game, because the previous edition of the game you would take him with units like las cannons, and now, well, las cannons come with built-in sunder for some reason, so it's made him a little bit redundant in that category, and of course Phosphex is a much, much worse weapon this edition. So, things to think about, right? So, some sort of combi weapon being held under the arm, like on the Champion, or like on the Death Guard Legion Praetor. Now, you can still have the iPad, but like I said, I would make those changes to it where the iPad is showing like an enemy fortification or something on the holographic display, a bastion, for example, or even the Hammerfall bunker, a hive city, basically anything other than infantry human communicating with him, because that's irrelevant to their job. I would also suggest looking at bits like here. We have the Old Saga Auxilia Command Squad, now out of production, so I guess we're getting a plastic one, which is cool, makes sense. And you can see that the equivalent sort of job in this force, and I say equivalent, they are different, but this Strategos here has like these telescope arrays, and he's got his big typewriter, I guess, to send out orders, but he's surveying the battlefield versus the guy who's clearly like the Master of Signals, Nuncio Vox type guy. This distinction is not here in this model, right? This looks like it could be a Master of Signals because he's got the big communication iPad that he can use with his gloves on, and he's got, the antennas on the backpack and such. He's got the antenna on the side of the head, all the different ocularies on the side of the helmet. It suggests a different model to what he is. And I think if you gave him something like these telescope arrays, and again, it could be designed for an Astartes. The Astartes have binoculars and things like that, and different monoculars are available on, say, Tank Commander sprues, that sort of thing. It would better represent that he is someone who is an engineer. He's surveying the battlefield. You could even have depending how scenic you want to make it, he could be on a larger base, like a 40 diameter base, and he could have like a theodolite on a tripod. You know, when you're driving down the road and you see an engineer off the side of the road or a surveyor, and they've got little tripods set up with a device called a theodolite, and they're measuring different elevations and such when they're surveying an area. There's many things you do with theodolite, but that's one example. A theodolite type of device could be on the base, and that sort of thing would suggest, okay, this guy is surveying, he's an engineer, he's trying to work out the enemy positions and the weaknesses, the key points. Cool, makes perfect sense to me, as opposed to just having the iPad. Then we've got the armor. So again, quickly look at the armor. Here it's supposed to be, this increased level of arm protection, but you can clearly see all the ribbing everywhere. It's underneath the arms even. Now, there's two ways we can deal with this. First is the shoulder pads. Easiest, simplest way to do it is copy the Raven Guard style. So we've got on the Raven Guard, by the way, the Mordathan and the Dark Furies both have these sort of shoulder pads. And what they have is the shoulder pad is like this separate armor plate. And you can see it's got its own little screws holding it on top of the Mark VI armor plate. And it's riveted on as an additional set of armor. So it makes it look more up-armored by having it as this overlapping plate, as opposed to it being just, instead of having like the little cutouts here, where the cutouts is just showing you the normal shoulder pad underneath. Instead, and it means that you have this very obvious plate on the model as shown. His ones, apart from this tiny little bit of trim, it doesn't really suggest that to you as the audience. And in fact, the right shoulder pad with the way the rivets are on there is just the right one in the image, the left one on the model is a stock Mark 6 shoulder pad, just standard rivets and all that. Very boring. So going something more like the Raven Guard have, where it's very obviously an additional layered armor plate, would go a long way. I would also suggest looking at things like the Destroyer squads. So in the Mark IV Destroyers here, these are actually quite a bit up armored, and you can just see the bottom of this model's shin here, front and center. You can see it pretty prominently, same as the guy on the left. You can see where the original shin is, and then there's this thinner armor plate slapped over the top. And we can see it on these guys. We can actually go down till we see the back of the leg. You can see there's like little clips and straps which are holding the plates on. Okay? And other than that, they look almost like the regular armor. Same with the chest. You can see the chest has this upper extra plate riveted on over the chest on the Destroyers. Looks beautiful to me, but maybe that's because my nostalgia talking, and, you know, I love these older Destroyer models, and it just works. Same with the helmets. They have the extra filters and this little like flat beveled faceplate that goes over the top of the regular Mark IV's faceplate. Or you could look at something like the Legion breeches, which let me see if I can bring them up. On the breeches, they have a similar sort of thing where they've got the Mark III power armor, basically identical to the regular Mark III squads, but what they've done with the armor is they've slapped on this faceplate. It takes the internet a little bit to load here sometimes. It's got this additional faceplate over the top of the original faceplate. You can see it pretty well in this image because it's bronzed. And it's just adding that, and the upper half of the helmet as well has an additional plate, you know, overlapping towards the back of the helmet here. So that's the sort of thing I would be looking at doing on this miniature. And in fact, I think, and I've got some spare ones of these, so I might do it, the Mark III breaching helmet would look really good on this miniature. As opposed to on him currently, where his extra armor is like the lower half of the thigh, and the armor's really on the back. The front, that's just trim. You know, like thin silver trim like normally goes around the edges of an armor plate. So those are the sort of changes I would make to the character. Move away from the close combat, ignore the hammer, right? Give him a combi melter. Melters are a siege weapon. This guy is then giving you the visual language of I am a siege character. Get away from the iPad, go for some sort of scope, sight, telescope, Ocularis device, even have it mounted on the backpack to really symbolize something like this guy here. Again, this is a very steampunk version of that concept because it's Solar Auxilia, but Marines have their own ones that can be utilized, and do that. Have a big ocular device mounted on the backpack that suggests that this guy is, you know, looking out, scanning, surveying the battlefield in some capacity, right? As opposed to on the current miniature, where he just looks like a master of signal with a hammer, okay? And with the belt and this sort of like descending scale-sized, I don't even what you call that, belt tassel? I don't know, his big crotch plate. I would change that to something more like the Death Guard Praetor, who I think is the perfect epitome of what this model would be in a fantastic Siegebreaker. But basically, have the armored plates like this, and that chainmail behind would be a beautiful touch. And in fact, the chainmail would work so well, even for a loyalist, because of his position, coming down on each arm. Because again, it's just more armor, suggesting this guy is more up towards the front of the battlefield, in the danger zone, directing all of the direct firepower where it needs to go, you know, putting himself at risk to observe the enemy and better coordinate what his troops are doing. as opposed to this very Masters of Signals looking miniature. Those are the changes I think would be great. This model as presented, I hate it. But if you were to change the name of this and tell me that this was not a Siegebreaker, this is actually a Master of Signals, I think I'd prefer that more, because I'd only make 1 or 2 changes to the miniature if this was a Master of Signals. But it's not. This is being sold to us as a Siegebreaker console, and it doesn't represent on the tabletop, and again, this is my personal opinion, it doesn't represent for me on the tabletop that miniature. It doesn't exemplify the fluff, nor does it exemplify the sort of weapons and role that I would expect to see from that miniature. So that's why it's a total fail. Anyway, I'm back with the Outer Circle. Give me your thoughts and feedback below, and I'll see you on the next video.